The north is cold and full of whispers.
The chain is too light. That is the first wrong thing he notices. Not the hall, not the voices, not the smell of tallow candles and damp stone filling Harrenhal's great chamber like something alive and rotting. The chain, the links of silver and black iron and pale gold hanging against his chest. He has worn it for 15 years, and it has never, not once, felt this way. Light as river water, light as forgetting. He raises his hands, turns them over in the torchlight. The knuckles are smooth. The skin sits flush against the bone the way it does in men who have not yet been worn down by decades of cold and wind and the particular punishment of a wall that never stops taking. No gout threading fire through his ankles. No fog behind his eyes, that dull, creeping thickness that settled over him in his last years, in the last hours before the fever broke him apart at sea. His left knee, which had not bent without protest since a fall on the ice somewhere in his 70s, bends now without asking permission. He is 35 years old. He had forgotten what 35 felt like from the inside. A sound reaches him. Lords, arguing. The enormous black hall of Harrenhal, its ceilings warped by dragon fire into shapes that were almost faces, mouths open, caught mid-scream, is full of great men and their retinues, and they have been arguing for 2 days. He knows this the way he knows things now, not from the 2 days he has just lived, but from 60 years forward, from a warm fire and a cup of wine and his brother's voice telling him everything, while beyond the wall the wind cut like something with intention. He breathes. Slow, he is alive. He is 35. He is at the great council of 233 AC, and somewhere across this hall his brother is waiting to become king. He finds Egg without searching. Aegon sits against the far wall with the stillness of a man who learned long ago how to wait inside a noisy room. 33 years old. Sand-haired. His face unlined by the kingship that should have come, that in a different telling of this story did come. That Aemon spent 60 years grieving at the wall while Egg spent those same years trying to fix a realm that had given him no good tools and no good time. He is watching the arguing lords with gray eyes that give nothing away, and he does not yet know that his brother is going to change everything in the next few minutes. Something tightens in Aemon's chest that has nothing to do with his young heart. Egg will not die at Summerhall. He will not burn in a room full of dragon eggs and desperate hope, with Duncan and dozens of others in a single moment of grief so total it bent the course of a dynasty. Aemon knows this because he is going to prevent it, because prevention is the only purpose he woke into this borrowed body with. He tilts his head slightly, the old habit, the gesture of a man retrieving rather than thinking, and lets himself look at his brother one moment longer. Then he looks back at the hall. The Lord Seneschal is speaking, that the words wash past him because he already knows the words. He has known this argument for 60 years. The great lords of Westeros are debating whether a fourth son raised as a hedge knight's squire is fit to be king, and half of them keep glancing at Maester Aemon's chair with expressions that run from hope to alarm, and none of them know yet what is about to happen. What he is about to do, the chamber smells of tallow and wet wool, and the particular dampness of Harrenhal that seeps through stone that never entirely dries. The candles at the high table gutter when a door at the far end opens, and for a moment every flame leans in the same direction, the way supplicants lean toward a throne. He watches the lords. He knows these faces, not from tonight, from 60 years of consequences. The broad man by the western pillar will obstruct Egg's land reforms in 8 years. Quietly, through courts instead of swords. The red-faced lord standing near the center is the grandfather of a man who will starve his own small folk to fund a private war nobody remembers now. The thin, sharp woman near the eastern door married her daughter into a house that will be part of the problem, and she knows it, and she is already calculating her options with the patience of someone who learned this before Aemon was born. He watches them the way a maester watches symptoms, looking for what the body knows before the mind admits it. The Lord Seneschal turns toward the dais. The ritual question. Aemon has been waiting for it since he woke on a ship with a fever taking him apart, since awareness came back like water rising through a cracked hull and he understood what had happened, and what it cost, and what it meant. He draws one breath, he stands. The hall quiets by degrees, the way a fire quiets when the wood runs out. First the men nearest to him, who see him rise, then the lords further back, who see those men go still, then, in a ripple moving outward through the chamber, silence. He reaches up. The chain comes over his head slowly. He holds it for a moment, feeling the weight of it, or rather the absence of weight, the specific lightness of 15 years worn and now being set aside. and then he places it on the table in front of him. The sound it makes against the stone is very small, a quiet final sound, the sound of a key laid somewhere it will not be picked up again. He looks at the Lord Seneschal. I accept. 2 words. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. The silence in the hall is absolute, and he speaks into it the way you speak into water, everywhere at once without effort. What follows is not clean. Lords rise to object, voices assembling reasons, reasons assembling urgency. The conclave will never recognize it. The chain means something it cannot simply be removed like a cloak. You cannot take a maester and call him a king. He listens to all of it. He tilts his head. He is patient in the specific way that men are patient when they already know how the argument ends. When the objections exhaust themselves, not because they are answered, but because objections find no purchase against a man who simply waits, the Lord Seneschal calls the vote. It is not unanimous. Aemon marks the faces of the lords who vote against, without anger, the way a physician marks a temperature clinically, completely as information rather than wound. These men are not enemies. They are problems of a particular shape that will require particular tools, and he has already begun, in the very same moment as their votes, to assemble those tools. The counting finishes. The Lord Seneschal speaks the result. Around the hall, men begin to rise, one by one, then in groups. The bow spreading outward from the high table the way silence spread outward from his standing, cloth rustling, chairs scraping, the sound of men lowering themselves before their king. Aemon does not look at them. He is looking at his brother. Egg has not moved. Every other man in the hall is rising or has risen. Egg sits against the far wall in the same posture he has held for 2 days, still watching. His expression is nothing Aemon can easily name from here. It holds nothing he has seen in 60 years of knowing that face. A long moment. 2, then Egg rises, slowly, deliberately, the way a man stands when he is choosing the act rather than obeying it. He holds Aemon's gaze across the full length of the hall, across the chain lying on the table between them, across 50 years of things lost and saved that neither of them has words for yet. He holds it long enough that Aemon understands he is being seen, not as a solution, not as a king, as his brother who has just done something that cannot be undone. Then he bows, not deep, but fully. The real thing. Aemon watches his younger brother's head go down. There is no triumph in it. There is only the specific, unmistakable weight of what it costs a man to bend his neck to someone he loves, when he is still not entirely sure he should. He hears the footsteps long before the torch appears. Months in this cell have made him precise about sound. The guards change at dawn and at dusk and at the dead midpoint of the night. He knows this by the rhythm of boots on the passage above, by the particular way each man descends the final stair. The one who comes at dawn favors his left knee, lands differently on the last step, a small, dull impact where the right should be the heavier one. The one who comes at midnight brings his keys out early and rattles them while he walks, which is the habit of a man who finds silence threatening. These footsteps are neither. One man, moving without the heaviness of armor, moving at a pace that carries no urgency, that particular quality of someone going somewhere they are not required to hurry, because the destination will wait. There is a slight pause at the bottom of the stair where every man who descends to the black cells pauses. Instinct, the body recognizing before the mind does that it has gone underground into something it does not want to enter. Then the footsteps continue. No keys, no second set of boots, no scrape of scabbard against stone. Bloodraven stays where he is. He has been sitting against the eastern wall because the western wall weeps moisture and the floor near the door grows slick with it by morning. He does not move. He watches the darkness where the passage turns. The torch appears around the corner and the light hits him like a small violence. His eye contracts. His one good eye, the left still sharp, still useful, which is more than the right has been since a blade found it in a fight he won anyway. The face behind the torch takes shape in increments. Young, pale, slight, a chain at the neck catching the light and throwing it back in fragments of silver and black iron and gold. He revises immediately. He had been deciding between stupidity and performance of confidence because new kings descended into their own cells for one of those 2 reasons. He looks at this young man's face and finds neither. The expression is something else entirely. Patient the way water is patient, not waiting for something, simply occupying the space it occupies without apology. The eyes find Bloodravens through the bars and do not widen. He has seen those eyes before. Not this face, not this age, But those eyes. The young king crouches and slides the torch into the bracket beside the cell door and straightens and produces a key. He opens the door himself. No jailer. No witness. He steps inside, and the cell is very small, and he sits down on the floor across from Bloodraven with his back against the opposite wall, the wet wall, and he does not flinch at it. 3 words. You dreamed of roots. Bloodraven goes still. Not the controlled stillness he maintains by practice. Something underneath it. Something that the practice cannot reach. He has told no one about the roots. The dreams that move through the Weirwood network carry images he has shared with no king, no confidant, no prisoner in any adjacent cell. A cave beyond the wall, roots like fingers pressing into his skull, himself becoming something that has no name in any language he possesses, something that is not quite alive in any way he currently understands life. You have the wrong man, Bloodraven says. His voice is steady. It is always steady. You dream of a cave, the young king says. Beyond the wall, a boy will come to you there, a boy with a broken back and gray eyes who needs what you will become more than you have needed anything. A pause. The slight tilt of a head, retrieving rather than thinking. You have been seeing him for years. You have not told anyone because there is no possible version of that conversation that does not end with your execution. The silence that follows has texture. Bloodraven feels it pressing against the sides of the cell. He does not move, not his hands, not his face. He has been controlling this particular response since he was 19 years old. The fractional give around the eyes that intelligent men learn to read before the words follow it. He stops it, holds it down beneath the surface where it cannot be used against him, except it has already been used. Whatever this young man has, it went past the surface without touching it. How, Bloodraven says, not a question, a statement of the impossibility of what has just happened. I've known you for 60 years, Aemon says. You haven't met me yet. The torch between them breathes in a draft from somewhere deep in the walls. Above them, the Red Keep exists in all its weight and noise, and the distant management of a kingdom that has just changed hands in a single afternoon of votes. Down here there is only stone, and the specific cold of underground places, and a 35-year-old king sitting on a wet floor speaking of visions that should exist in no mind but Bloodraven's own. Bloodraven looks at him. He has spent 40 years watching men who possessed information they should not have, traders' genuine talents who assembled truth from fragments the way some men assemble fire from spark and dry grass. He knows what that looks like. He knows the micro-expressions of a man performing knowledge he obtained through tradecraft, the slight leading quality of the question hidden inside the statement. This is not that. This man is not performing. He is reporting. The Weirwood network, Bloodraven says, slowly, feeling the shape of the words. You've seen through it. You taught me. The young king's voice carries something beneath the steadiness. Not grief exactly, the memory of grief. 60 years from now, in a future that no longer exists because I'm sitting in this cell rather than dying at sea, you were a tree by then. A pause that is not for effect, for the honest difficulty of saying it plainly. You were the most extraordinary thing I had ever encountered. Green dreams coming through stone walls when I was very old and blind and cold, and very near the end of everything. Bloodraven says nothing. He has not said nothing in quite this particular way in a very long time. Not because he has nothing to say, but because what is in front of him requires a kind of internal reorganization that cannot be rushed without being ruined. You were going to the wall regardless, Aemon continues. As a prisoner, Egg's mercy, years as Lord Commander, then north into a cave, into the root system of a weirwood tree, and a century of watching through 10,000 eyes while the realm above you slowly forgot what you were. The slight tilt of his head. A man retrieving rather than thinking. I'm offering something different. You're offering me freedom, Bloodraven says. I'm offering you purpose. The distinction is immediate, precise, and correct. Freedom is a cell with the door open. Purpose is a reason to walk out of it. The torch gutters. Somewhere above them, distant boots cross stone and fade. Bloodraven looks at his hands. They are not young hands. 58 years in the service of thrones that kept finding new ways to make that service feel like punishment. The fingers are long and pale, and they have held daggers and quills in ravens' legs, and once, a very long time ago, the hand of a woman he loved before love became a luxury he stopped permitting himself. Hand of the king, he says, testing the weight of it against the air in the cell. Here, tonight. Without ceremony, Aemon's voice does not change. The ceremony will follow. The ceremony is for the lords. This is for the work. Something very close to a laugh moves through Bloodraven's chest. It does not reach his face. A king who names his hand in a dungeon. A king who needed his hand before the dungeon became permanent. Silence. He looks at the young man across from him, at the impossible patience in those eyes, at the absent chain, at the visible fact of someone who has already lived every argument Bloodraven is considering and already knows where each one ends. "You'll need more than a spy to save the realm," Bloodraven says. "I know," Aemon says. "That's why I'm here." A shorter silence this time. Bloodraven puts one hand against the floor and pushes himself up. The joint in his left hip makes its complaint, and he disregards it with the efficiency of long practice. He straightens slowly, one vertebra at a time, until he reaches his full height. He had forgotten how tall he was. The king rises also, shorter by nearly a hand's width. He lifts the torch from its bracket and extends it, not to light the way, but the way a man extends something he is offering with both hands, an acknowledgement without a name. Bloodraven takes it. He turns toward the door, one step behind him, then another. A king following his hand out of a cell, through a passage that has held better men and worse, and remembered none of them, toward a staircase rising back into the weight of the world above. Bloodraven does not look back. He already knows the cost of what he has just agreed to. He has spent 40 years calculating the cost of things before agreeing to them. And this calculation is already done, has been done since the moment Aemon said 3 words that should not exist. He walks anyway. The raven arrives before dawn and carries nothing. No scroll holder on the leg. It lands on the balcony outside Aemon's study with the precision of something guided rather than flown, and it sits in the gray cold with its head tilted at an angle that is slightly wrong. The way no wild raven tilts. The way a thing tilts when the mind behind it is somewhere else and the body is maintaining position from memory. Bloodraven is already awake. He is always already awake when these ravens come. He sits in the chair by the fire with the expression of a man returning from somewhere, eyes clearing like water settling after a stone. "Tyrosh," he says. 3 days ago. His voice carries the flatness of someone reporting what he witnessed rather than what he was told. 22 ships. He brought the skull cases on the lead vessel. He wanted his ancestors to see the landing. A pause. His hands are folded in his lap with the careful stillness of a man who learned long ago that his hands give him away. 13,000 swords. The number we were given was wrong. Aemon looks at the raven on the balcony. It looks back with Bloodraven's patience. "Which lords?" he says. "Tully Bannerman, Maester, Vance." A slight tightening around Bloodraven's right eye, the one that remains. The younger Stokeworth's son, he has debts his father doesn't know he's settled with promises. He uncrosses his ankles, slowly, 6 weeks before they land. Aemon nods. He has been waiting for this since 233 AC. Not hoping it wouldn't come, there was never any possibility it wouldn't come. When you build something the powerful find threatening, the powerful organize against it. This is not a law of politics, it is physics. He has had 4 years to prepare, and preparation is the only advantage worth having when what you're facing is 13,000 swords and 4 decades of accumulated grievance crossing the narrow sea to settle an argument that should have ended at Redgrass Field. 3 days later, he tells the small council there will be no royal army. The chair scrapes back immediately. 2 advisors speak over each other. Aemon lets the objections assemble themselves in full. He has learned that interrupting men mid-argument only extends the argument, and then says quietly that he will be sailing to meet Hagon I Blackfire with Bloodraven and 3 members of the Kingsguard, and that the meeting will be a negotiation. The silence that follows has a specific texture, the sound of men deciding whether their king has lost his mind. The Golden Company has never broken a contract, Aemon says. They didn't cross the narrow sea because they love Hagon. They came because they were promised Westeros. He looks at the faces around the table. I intend to give them something more durable. The Parley Field sits on a flat scrub of land above a coastline where Hagon's fleet has anchored in a bay the color of hammered pewter. The grass is brown and sparse. The air carries salt, and the smell of horse, and the distant low sound of 13,000 men who have been on ships for 3 weeks and are ready to be on land. 2 fires burn on the field. One is Hagon's, one is Aemon's, arranged so that neither man must approach the other's fire. A neutrality agreed in the exchange of ravens that preceded this meeting, conducted with a formality both sides understood was performance. Aemon dismounts on his side of the field. No crown, no ceremonial armor. He has the Kingsguard because to come without them would have been read as false modesty or a trap. He has Bloodraven because Bloodraven insisted, and because the particular quality of Bloodraven's presence, the birthmark, the one red eye, the constant suggestion of something behind the visible has always been the most effective preamble to any negotiation Aemon conducts. Haegon I Blackfire crosses from his fire. He is not what the stories made him. Aemon had expected something built for the role, some physical manifestation of a claim that stretches back 40 years, something bred to look like it belongs on a throne. What crosses the field is a man of approximately 40 with a soldier's posture and the specific wariness of someone who has been preparing for this moment since childhood without being entirely certain he deserves it. He stops 6 feet away. He looks at Aemon. He looks at Bloodraven. His eyes move slowly, a man counting rather than observing. A maester, Haegon says. Not an insult, a statement of what he sees. I left the chain behind, Aemon says. The rest was always true. Haegon's jaw shifts. I have 13,000 swords. Yes, the slight tilt of Aemon's head. I know. I also know that 4 of your company captains received my letter before you set sail and have asked their men to consider it. I know the Stokeworth boy's promises are worth less than what he offered, because his father has already been spoken to and the debts have been restructured. I know your fleet carries provisions for 6 weeks of sustained land campaign, which means your margin for a protracted engagement is smaller than your strategists have represented to you. Haegon goes very still. I know, Aemon continues with the same quiet rhythm, that you are not a man who believes in lost causes. You've watched too many men die for one. What I'm offering is not a surrender, it is an end to the cause being necessary. The fire between them breathes in the salt wind. Haegon's lieutenant, a broad man with the look of someone who has been with the company long enough that his eyes move like a soldier's rather than a lord's, does not move. Restored lands, Aemon says. Your name carried without shame anywhere in the 7 kingdoms. Every man of the company who lays down his sword, his history acknowledged, his service recognized, his exile ended, not as a mercy, as a correction. He holds Haegon's gaze. Aegor Rivers was unjustly exiled. That wrong is not undone by pretending it did not occur. Something moves in Haegon's face. Not softening, a shift, the fractional internal adjustment of a man encountering an argument he had not prepared a counter for. My claim, Haegon says, is real, Aemon says immediately. I will not tell you otherwise. You are descended from Aegon IV's legitimized son. The claim is legitimate. What I'm asking you to set aside is not the lineage, it is the method. The throne you would take by this road comes soaked in the blood of men who would have served you willingly through a different door. A long silence. The sea beyond the field makes its sound, indifferent to everything happening above it. My ancestors. Haegon says it the way a man says the name of something he is not willing to reduce to argument. The skull cases on the lead ship. 40 years of dead men watching from their gold cases deserve descendants who live, Aemon says. That is the only memorial worth having. He gives Haegon 3 days and rides back without waiting for an answer. Because waiting would have looked like wanting one. The answer comes in pieces. On the first day, 6 company captains send their men across the field to where the Westerosi camp has assembled along the coastal road. 314 soldiers, weapons stacked, names recorded. On the second day, 400 more. On the third day, Haegon burns the offer. The battle that follows is brief in the way that battles are brief when one side has already lost the internal argument that decides these things before the first sword leaves its scabbard. The remaining men, who have not crossed, do not negotiate. They advance. Haegon is in the center of it, not from the rear, not behind a screen of better swordsmen. He fights the way men fight when they have run out of other options and the thing they are fighting for is the only part of them that still makes sense. He dies there, in honest combat, which is more than the men before him were granted. The field takes 4 hours. Aemon watches from a rise above it. He has learned this, that a king who watches a battle he designed understands it better than a king inside it. He does not close his eyes at the end. He looks at what the choice cost. He will look at it for as long as it takes to remember it properly. At the far margin of the field, barely visible in the afternoon light, a figure in Lannister gold sits horseback. 17 years old. Tytos, whose father arrived 2 days late with a host that performed adequately and understood nothing. The boy's face is impossible to read from this distance. He is watching men die for an idea, and something in the way he sits his horse suggests he has not yet decided what he thinks about that. Aemon watches him a moment longer than is necessary. That night, Bloodraven sits by a fire that is not the parley fire and not the battle fire, just a fire, modest, functional, throwing its light across a stretch of ground where 3 septons work in silence, quills moving across fresh parchment, listing names. The men who crossed before the battle, and the names of those who cannot be recorded now because there is no longer a man to attach them to. Bloodraven is not watching the scribes. His eye is open and his body is present, and his mind is somewhere over the bay, behind wings watching the remainder of Haegon's fleet through the cold salt dark. His hands rest in his lap with a stillness that is not calm, the stillness of deep attention. The true believers are simpler than the pragmatists, he says. To Aemon, who sits beside him and says nothing, the pragmatists convert, the believers require different handling. His raven lands on the arm of his chair. He doesn't look at it. I'll need 6 months and reliable correspondence near Tyrosh. His eye drifts toward the fire. Not seeing it, I'll keep watching, he says. He already is. The shell is warm. That is the thing that keeps him coming back. Not warm from the fire burning 3 feet away in the iron brazier. He has measured this, moved the eggs closer and further, tracked the variance with the patience of a man who has nothing else requiring patience right now. The warmth comes from inside, something in the stone-deep dark at the center of each egg that runs slightly above the temperature of the room, the way a sleeping animal runs slightly above the temperature of the straw it sleeps in. He presses his palm flat against the largest one, crimson-black veined with what looks like gold in firelight and like copper in daylight, roughly the size of a child's head, heavy enough that when he first lifted it 6 months ago, his wrist bent unexpectedly, surprised by the weight of something that looked like it should weigh less. Still, quiet, warm. He takes his hand back and looks at the texts spread across the workbench. 14 of them. 6 languages, 3 of which he reads imperfectly, and 1 he cannot read at all but whose diagrams he has been deciphering by inference for 11 months. The alchemist who came last month, a small, quick-eyed man from Lys with specific claims about fire temperatures, sat with these texts for 3 hours and told Egg that a coordinated ritual using multiple eggs and a sustained dragon flame substitute might achieve what centuries of isolated attempts had failed to achieve. Egg listened carefully and said nothing. What the alchemist did not know, because Egg had not told him, was that the central question was not temperature. Every text that touched this subject circled eventually to the same word. The Valyrian sat in the margin of the oldest document like something carved rather than written. Axio. Master in the oldest sense. Not owner, not writer, something closer to the one the thing recognizes. The question was blood. Not temperature. Not the elaborate symbology the alchemist proposed with the expensive hand gestures of a man who charged by complexity. Blood and fire, and a Targaryen willing to do what that combination required. He has not told Aemon about the workshop. He has not told him about the alchemist, the texts, the 11 months of work assembled in this room at Summerhall's eastern wing, where the stone is oldest, and the drafts are lowest and nobody has had reason to enter since Egg's grandfather used it for purposes Egg has never asked about. He has not told Aemon because Aemon already knows too many things he should not know, and every time Egg brings something to his brother, Aemon tilts his head and produces an answer that is more correct than an answer arrived at in that conversation has any right to be. He wants to solve one thing first. He wants to bring his brother a dragon. The door opens. Egg does not turn immediately. His hands go still against the bench, one of them resting near the largest egg, and he listens to how the latch is handled. One hand, no hesitation, no knock, and knows before he turns. Aemon steps inside. He closes the door behind him. He is 41 years old and carries it the way he carries everything, without the evidence of it. He looks at the bench, at the eggs, at the spread of texts. Then he pulls the stool from the far end of the workbench, sits, and begins reading the nearest page. Egg watches him. "You're not supposed to know about this room," Egg says. "And yet," Aemon says. He turns the page. He reads for a moment. The fire in the brazier makes its small sounds. Outside the narrow window, the palace grounds hold the particular quiet of a mid-afternoon with nothing scheduled. "Which one will you sacrifice?" Aemon asks. He does not look up. Egg's jaw tightens. "I don't know what you mean." Aemon looks up then. The expression is the one Egg has learned over 6 years, means the conversation has reached the part where pretending is no longer available as an option. "Yes, you do. You've read all 14 of these. You read Valyrian better than you admit. You know what Axio means and you know what it costs. A pause. The slight tilt of his head. The question is whose blood? I'm asking which of you agreed to it, you or the alchemist. The fire pops. Heat moves across the backs of Egg's hands. The alchemist doesn't know about that part, Egg says. Quieter. No. Aemon agrees he wouldn't. 6 years. 6 years of watching his brother rule with the specific maddening competence of someone who has already made every mistake and knows which ones are fatal. The small folk protections, Egg had dreamed of those for years, had carried them across Westeros in his head while Duncan walked beside him on the road, had assembled the arguments in the abstract the way a man assembles weapons he hasn't yet been given cause to use. Aemon passed 3 of them in the first 18 months. The legal codes followed, the Maester protocols, the agricultural reform that every lord between the Neck and the Red Mountains had called impossible until it wasn't. Every reform Egg had planned, Aemon got there first. Not maliciously. There is nothing unkind in his brother that Egg can locate, which is its own particular difficulty. You cannot resent a man for doing good. You can only feel, quietly and with no available target for the feeling, like a man whose purpose has been delivered without him. So the eggs. The one thing. The thing that reaches past politics into something older. Targaryen blood and ancient fire and the line between what they had been and what they had become. The thing his brother could not do alone. Mass hatching doesn't work, Aemon says, not harshly. As a fact given to someone who is owed a fact, I know this without being able to fully explain how I know it. What I can tell you is that the ritual you are building toward multiple eggs, multiple blood offerings, concentrated fire, fails. Not just here, categorically. The approach is wrong. Egg looks at him, then what's right? 1 egg. Aemon folds his hands on the bench. 1 Targaryen, 17 years of patience. 17 years. Egg turns this over. The workshop around him seems to contract slightly around the number. The 14 texts, the months of work, the warm egg 3 inches from his left hand. 17, Egg says, approximately. The slight tilt of his head. I am not certain of the exact margin. I am certain of the method. He looks at the eggs. Something crosses his face that is not quite loss and not quite affection. Something that occupies the space between them without a name Egg can reach for. 1 bond, individual. Sustained over years of proximity and Targaryen blood and controlled fire. Patient, non-spectacular. It is the opposite of a ritual. It is a relationship. He stands. He looks at Egg directly. I want you to run it. Not an apology in his voice. No consolation in the structure of the sentence. Not because there is nothing else for you, because you are the correct choice. You know these texts better than anyone alive. You have more patience than you give yourself credit for, more than you showed on the road, more than you have permitted yourself since. A small pause. The only moment in the conversation where something shows through the steadiness. Since the throne went another direction, he looks at the eggs again. Choose one, begin. I will ensure you have everything you need. No interference, no timeline. Egg looks at his brother for a long moment. He had come here to bring Aemon a dragon. He had imagined it specifically, the room where it would happen, the expression on his brother's face, the moment when Aegon Targaryen, 5th of his name, Hedge Knight's squire, the man who was supposed to be king and wasn't, placed something irreplaceable in his brother's hands and watched him understand what it cost. What Aemon is offering him now is almost that. The project, the work, 17 years of it, which actually leads to the dragon. It is close enough to what he wanted that it should feel like enough. He nods. Once, precisely, something in his eyes does not reach the nod. Aemon sees it. He does not name it. He picks up the Valyrian text from the end of the bench, tucks it under his arm, and walks to the door. Outside in the narrow corridor, Sir Duncan the Tall stands with his back against the far wall and his arms folded across a chest that has no business being that broad on a human being. 6 feet and 11 inches of night wearing the expression of a man professionally accustomed to waiting outside rooms. He straightens slightly when the door opens. He does not know that in another version of this story, this corridor does not exist for him. That a night at Summerhall ends things it has no right to end, takes people it has no right to take, and that the room at his back is also a grave he will never have to occupy now. Aemon stops. He looks up at Duncan the Tall the way a man looks at something he is glad still exists and has no adequate words for. "Good afternoon, Sir Duncan," he says. 3 words. Unremarkable. Easy. Duncan nods, puzzled, and steps aside. "My lord." Aemon walks past him down the corridor. Duncan watches him go. He turns to look at the workshop door, slightly open, the firelight flickering at the threshold. Then he looks back down the corridor where the king has already turned the corner. He doesn't know what to make of it. The reform ordinances travel by raven. They have to. There is no other way to reach 1,400 castles across a continent in less than the decade it would take a mounted courier to make the rounds. Each scroll carries the same wax and the same seal, and a covering note from the small council, and each lands in each castle's rookery and is carried to each castle's maester, and read with varying degrees of alarm. The first batch concerns medicine. Wash hands before examination, boil instruments before use, isolate fever patients within 48 hours of symptom onset. The language is precise, and the reasoning is framed in terms each maester can locate within the existing vocabulary of their training. Spirits of corruption, the ancient texts call what moves between sick bodies and well ones, and the new protocols are presented as a rigorous application of that established principle, rather than a departure from it. This is deliberate. Aemon knows the Citadel well enough to know that it defends its existing knowledge less fiercely than it defends the feeling of being consulted. The Citadel sends a letter of objection by the end of the first month. Aemon reads it in his study and puts it in a drawer. What the letter does not argue, because the letter writers cannot argue what they do not yet know, is that the protocols will prevent 3 epidemic outbreaks across the decade. The first would have taken root in the Reach during the wet summer of 243 AC, a fever that in its natural course would have moved from a single household near Highgarden to a village to a market town to a river trade route before anyone had properly named it. The isolation protocols catch it in that first household. It goes no further. The second would have been worse, the third worse still. Nobody writes a song about a fever that does not spread. No maester composes a treatise on the 40,000 deaths that do not occur. The decade ends with 40,000 people alive who have no idea they owe anything to a basin of warm water, and a king who read enough ancient texts to find the right question buried in a chapter no archmaester had assigned in 2 centuries. The second batch arrives in 242 AC and concerns agriculture, 3-field crop rotation. The principle is not new. It exists in the texts, has always existed, was practiced in Valyria and before Valyria in civilizations whose names no Westerosi maester can reliably pronounce. What has never existed in Westeros is a compelling reason for lords to implement it when short-term yield serves their interests better than long-term soil health. Aemon creates the reason. Grain yields above a specified threshold are taxed on a sliding scale that penalizes monoculture. Estates that implement the rotation receive a countervailing reduction. The math is arranged to produce a specific behavior without asking anyone to change what they believe, which is the only mechanism of change that survives contact with men who believe the existing order is the natural order. The Reach produces a surplus grain reserve by the middle of the decade. The Westerlands follow 18 months behind. The surplus moves north during the winter of 247 AC. No ceremony, no debt instrument, no letter of obligation traveling alongside the grain carts. Word reaches Edwyle Stark at Winterfell that the shipment carries no conditions. He does not send an acknowledgement immediately. He sits with the information the way Northerners sit with things that surprise them, for a long time in a cold room until the surprise has been examined from every direction and found to be real. Then he attends the next gathering of lords and takes a chair where he can watch the king's face without being obvious about it. He watches for 2 days. He does not speak. He goes home. The following winter, Winterfell's gates are open to 2 crowned surveyors who would have been turned away in any prior year. The third batch is the one the lords fight. Legal codes for the protection of small folk arrive in 243 AC and are received across the 7 kingdoms with a range of responses that runs from grudging compliance through loud complaint to 3 outright refusals. The refusals are more useful than the compliance. They give Aemon a surface to work against. The First Lord is wealthy because his land sits across a trade route that has had no practical alternative for 3 generations. He has levied informal tolls on goods moving through it without anyone mounting a credible legal objection, which he has interpreted as consent. Aemon opens a road. The road costs the crown more than it should and takes 4 months of engineering and 3 months of surfacing, and when it opens, the goods simply move around the refusing lord's land rather than through it. The lord receives no letter. He receives an accounting of his own revenues annotated with the crown seal, with a notation that the alternative road will remain open indefinitely. He signs the code at the start of the 2nd year. The second lord has a son of marriageable age and aspirations for the boy that require crown favor. The marriage that is subsequently arranged through channels that appear coincidental places the son in a household where the small folk codes are simply the manner of running an estate, not ideology, practice. Within a decade, the son inherits his own lands with habits already formed. The third lord is violent about it. He makes a public demonstration in his own great hall, 3 small folk, the new protections they attempted to invoke, and a punishment administered with maximum visibility. He is making a point to every man in his household about what the new codes are worth in his lands. 1 maester arrives from King's Landing, 2 crown witnesses, a document. The document is read aloud in the Lord's own hall, before his household, before he can object to the audience. It contains 9 years of private correspondence with families whose Blackfire-adjacent loyalties have been under Bloodraven's observation since the decade prior. Some of the correspondence is authentic. The Lord knows which portions are authentic. He cannot confirm or deny any of it without confirming something he would rather not confirm. He loses the room before he opens his mouth. The lands and title follow. The family retains a smaller holding. No execution, no public trial that would require the crown to produce evidence in a format Bloodraven prefers to keep unexamined. The point is made at precisely the necessary volume, loud enough that every lord on the continent hears it clearly, quiet enough that no one needs to call it what it is. No other lord refuses a code. The hardest conversation of the decade happens in the small council chamber with every candle burned to a stub and no guards within earshot. Bloodraven sits in a chair he has increasingly stopped leaving. He is old in the way of men who have spent too much of themselves in service and are now collecting the debt in their joints and the skin around their eyes. His hair is white against white skin. The mark on his face has deepened. He is present, always present, but the quality of his presence has shifted in the past 2 years. There are moments in meetings where his eye goes flat and the body breathes and maintains position while the mind is somewhere above, in the trees. "You're dreaming again," Aemon says. "I'm always dreaming." Bloodraven's voice arrives without preamble. He had not appeared to be listening. The trees are very loud tonight. The last candle between them is nearly gone. Outside the window, King's Landing is dark and indifferent, going about the business of a city that does not know what is being discussed inside this room. "What do they say?" Aemon asks. A long pause. Not hesitation, the pause of a man translating from a language that has no adequate counterpart. "They don't say things," Bloodraven says. "They show things. The difference matters." He looks at the dying candle, really looks at it, which means for this moment he is entirely here. Something in the far north is very old and very patient. It has been patient longer than Westeros has had a name. His one eye finds Aemon's across the table. "You already know this," Bloodraven says. "I know it," Aemon says. "I want to know if it's closer." The pause that follows has its own weight. The specific weight of a man measuring something he cannot measure with precision and does not want to misrepresent. Not closer. Bloodraven settles back into the chair, more awake. The candle goes out. Neither of them moves to light another. They sit in the dark with the sound of the city below them and the sound much further away of something that has been waiting longer than either of them has years left to spend. She is 7 years old, and she has never heard of Aemon Targaryen. She knows her father's name and her mother's name and the name of the maester who came when the fever started, who washed his hands in a basin of warm water before he touched her, who moved her away from her brothers before the end of the second day. She knows the smell of the cloth her mother laid across her forehead. She knows the sound the chickens make in the first light. She does not know that in another telling of this year she does not survive the frost. She wakes on a morning in early autumn in the Riverlands to find the fever has broken. The light through the window is pale gold and specific, the way light is specific in the morning when the season is turning. She is weak and her throat is dry. She is alive in the way people are alive when they do not yet know that anything was at risk. She gets up, she walks outside into the morning, where the chickens are. Aemon has never met her. He never will. The boy is born on a morning in late summer, when the Red Keep smells of rain and hot stone. Aemon is in the Godswood when the servant comes. He is sitting with his back against the weirwood sapling that Bloodraven insisted on planting 6 years ago when his body had begun insisting that proximity to the root network was no longer negotiable. The tree is still young, barely taller than a standing man, but its face is already present in the pale bark. Aemon does not look at it the way he did when he first had it planted. He looks at it the way you look at a colleague. The servant arrives red-faced and slightly out of breath. "Prince Jaehaerys," Egg's son, the crown prince, 21 years old and still learning the distance between what he intends and what he achieves, has a son, mother well, child healthy. And his coloring? Aemon asks. The servant blinks. This is not the expected question. Silver hair, my lord, the Targaryen look. Aemon nods. He looks back at the weirwood face for a moment. Then he stands and dusts off his knees and walks toward the keep. He already knows what this child is. He already knows what this child could become, given the right sequence of pressures applied at the wrong angle, given a throne no one should have handed him, given a court that discovered too late that brilliance and stability are not the same thing when they live in the same man. In another life, in a life Aemon has spent 12 years dismantling, this boy eventually burned men inside their armor and called it cleansing, eventually locked a maester in a room for a fortnight for the crime of contradicting him, eventually sat on a throne and undid in a decade what his grandfather's line had spent 2 generations building. In this life, Aerys Targaryen is an hour old. Aemon has work to do. The first thing he notices across the next 2 years is the quality of the boy's attention. Most children diffuse. Their focus lands briefly on each new thing and departs before full contact is made. Aerys does not diffuse. He fixes. He finds a thing and holds it with his eyes, and does not release it until he has decided what he thinks about it, and what he thinks is usually more developed than the adults in the room are prepared to receive. He is 3 years old when he watches 2 dogs fight in the outer yard and turns to his nurse and says, "The small one wanted to." The nurse laughs. Aemon, passing through the yard on other business, stops walking. He watches the boy for a year before he introduces himself. When he does, it is without arrangement, no summons, no formal occasion. He finds Aerys in a corridor near the kitchens, crouching over a dead sparrow that has fallen from a window ledge, examining it with the complete absorption of someone for whom the world currently contains only this bird and the question it presents. "Do you want to know why it fell?" Aemon asks. The boy looks up. He does not startle. "I already know," he says. The wind came the wrong way." Aemon crouches beside him. They look at the sparrow together. The stone is cold through the knees of his trousers. "What does the wrong way feel like?" Aemon asks. Aerys thinks about this with genuine effort. The thinking is visible. Not performance, not a child performing seriousness, but the actual mechanism of a mind that takes its work at face value. "Like when someone moves your chair," he says finally. "Before you sit down." Aemon nods slowly. He stands. He walks on. But he comes back. He keeps coming back. The approach takes shape over years, the way approaches do when the thing you are shaping has its own internal logic that requires working with rather than against. Art first. The boy's hands are precise in a way the rest of him is not. He can sit still for 2 hours over a piece of parchment, when the same body cannot sit still for 2 minutes when there is nothing to do with itself. Music follows because Aerys hears things before he understands them, which is a particular caste of intelligence that handled correctly becomes attunement, and handled incorrectly becomes the kind of listening that hears threat in everything. Philosophy third. Giving a mind of this shape the vocabulary of ideas is the difference between a fire burning in a hearth and a fire burning through what surrounds it. He is kept from court politics. This requires careful management because a prince has a gravitational pull toward power, and power has a gravitational pull toward whoever is available and willing, and the combination is its own instruction. Aemon redirects each pull in sequence, the way water is redirected by small stone arrangements that look incidental from above. The marriage is arranged differently. In another world, a prophecy drives 2 people together who have no business being confined together. In this world, Aemon identifies a match with enough independence to resist Aerys's worst instincts and enough patience to outlast them. He arranges it through channels that appear coincidental. The girl is not a Targaryen. She is the second daughter of a Reach Lord, intelligent and grounded in a way that her new husband finds simultaneously irritating and stabilizing, which is precisely the correct ratio. Aerys complains about her for 2 years and then stops complaining, which is how Aemon knows the match has worked. The green gold dragon has been circling the upper chamber for 20 minutes. It is 5 years old and still growing, and already its wingspan throws shadows across the dragon pit floor that move like water. It always circles when Aerys enters. It does not do this for everyone, which is a fact Aerys has been tracking privately for 2 years with the meticulous care of a man who understands that the pattern is significant before he understands why. When it passes close, the air displaces, a pressure Aerys feels in the center of his chest a moment before he hears it. Physical before understood. Body faster than mind. "I want to ride it," Aerys says. Not today. Aemon is behind him. He positions himself slightly behind in these spaces, where the stone angles the sound and the light in ways that matter. When the pause that follows is not hesitation, the tilt of the old man's head, the slight retrieval gesture Aerys has watched his entire life without ever fully decoding, when you understand that it chooses you, not the other way. Aerys turns. The face that looks back at him is 52 years old by Aerys's counting, though something behind the eyes has never corresponded to 52. Something that looks out from a much greater distance, from a country with no name and no map. Does it choose based on blood? Aerys asks. No. Aemon's voice carries nothing, no performance of wisdom, no effort toward impression, just the answer. It chooses based on what you are when no one is watching. Above them, the dragon makes a low sound, not a roar, something shorter and more complex. Like a question with edges, Aerys looks up at it, and his face does something Aemon has been watching for 17 years, preparing for, arranging the conditions around so that it could be this and not the other thing. The wonder in it is real. The wanting is real. Neither has yet become what wanting becomes in men of a certain kind under a certain pressure. The edge of it is there. Aemon sees it. He has always seen it. Then I'll need to be better than I am, Aerys says, quietly, without irony, without performance, just the thought arriving at his mouth because he has not yet learned to intercept the true ones before they reach the air. Aemon says nothing. He watches the dragon complete another arc above them. He thinks briefly of a boy he will never meet, born long after he has gone into a world that required him to be more than a person, who flew one of these creatures over a field of ice and fire, and managed, barely, to remain human through it. He thinks about the cost of the choosing, what it takes from the chosen. He watches the dragon. He is not mad. Aemon reaches this conclusion the way you test ice before crossing it, pressing each new piece of evidence against the known weight before committing the step. Aerys at 24 is a man Aemon cannot entirely predict, which is not the same thing as a man he cannot trust. He is occasionally difficult in the specific way of brilliant people who have not yet failed at something that mattered. He is occasionally frightening in the way of a man whose full attention when it arrives carries a pressure other people feel before they can name it. He has never been handed a problem too large for a human being to hold. Aemon arranged this the way he arranged the trade road, not by command but by terrain. Aerys is Warden of the East. He is good at it. Better than good, which is almost a surprise, almost meaning that Aemon had not predicted quite everything, which happens occasionally, and which he files without comfort under the category of things to watch. Aerys does not know this life has been shaped around him. He does not know that the shape of it is a gift assembled over 24 years by a man who knew what he was preventing. He lives inside the life he has, the dragons, the art, the work, the wife who argues with him in a way he has learned to need. And when he rides east to manage a dispute, the lords who expected a decorative prince find something considerably more functional instead. He does not know what he was supposed to become. Aemon intends to keep it that way, in the same drawer where he keeps the Citadel's letters, closed and undisturbed, and very carefully locked. The 37th failure leaves a smell that takes 4 days to clear from the chamber. Not fire, not stone, something between them that has no name in any language Egg has access to. A smell like the inside of a forge, after the forge has been abandoned for a century, like heat and time compressed into a single moment of nothing happening. He stands in the chamber with soot on both hands, and the egg in front of him unchanged, inert, warm from the fire and from whatever lives inside it that refuses to answer, and he looks at it for a long time before he carries it carefully back to its shelf. He does not say anything. There is no one in the chamber to say anything to. He has been doing this alone. 17 years ago, Aemon told him 1 Targaryen, 1 egg, patient repetition, and then walked out of the workshop at Summerhall and left him to it. This is what that looks like from the inside. It looks like a man of middle age, then late middle age, sitting in a cold room on a rock in the sea with ancient texts and a fire and variations on the same act repeated until variation itself becomes its own kind of patience. The 38 that came before, 38 combinations of blood volume and Valyrian script and fire temperature and duration. Each one noted, each one failed. The notes filling 3 volumes of his own handwriting in a script too cramped to read comfortably because comfort stopped being the point around attempt. 11. The 38th produces heat, not from the fire, from inside the egg, a pulsing warmth against his palm that has never been there in quite this way. Rhythmic, almost deliberate, like something deciding. He holds his breath for 40 minutes. Then it stops. The egg returns to its baseline warmth and does not do it again for 4 days, and when it does it again on the 4th day, he is not in the room. He does not sleep well for a month. The 39th cracks. A sound at the 4-hour mark, like a single knuckle popped in a quiet room. He looks at the egg and the hairline runs across the upper third of the shell, dark against the crimson, no wider than a thread. He sits completely still, watching it for 3 hours. It does not widen. The crack is there, and then the egg is simply a cracked egg, and nothing comes from the crack except, eventually, a smell of something ancient and disappointed. The 40th destroys the egg entirely. He made a mistake in the fire temperature, and he knew he was making it as he made it, and he corrected too late by a margin of 20 minutes. The shell collapses inward. He watches it happen. He puts the pieces in a cloth, and he walks to the window, and he looks at the sea for a long time. Then he goes back to the shelf and picks up the 41st. He writes to Aemon once, in the middle of the night, after the 37th, not to report failure. He has already committed to not reporting failures. He writes, "I begin to understand why the wall sent you back. You knew this would take someone who had already run out of ways to quit." He reads this back. He folds the parchment. He does not send it. In the morning it looks like something that should stay private. It stays in the 3rd volume of notes, folded between 2 pages of temperature records. 3 days before the 41st attempt, Aemon arrives. He does not send word ahead. He arrives on a gray morning by ship, as the clouds were deciding whether to open, and Egg hears his footsteps in the passage outside the chamber and does not turn. 41, Egg says. "I know," Aemon says from the doorway. He reads for a moment. The fire in the brazier makes its small sounds. Egg turns the egg in his hands. The 41st egg is not crimson-black. It is the blue-gray of deep water. This is important, though he cannot articulate exactly why. Something in his hands says this one. Something that is not quite certainty, but occupies the same room as certainty when the lights are low. The fire needs to burn for 3 days, Aemon says. Dragonstone coal, the chamber sealed. Egg looks at him. "You know the exact—" "No." The tilt of his head. "I know the direction. The exact form is yours." He means it. Egg can see that he means it, and has to decide in the next 30 seconds whether to be frustrated by the distinction or grateful for it. He puts the egg down and looks at his hands, the soot still working its way into the creases of his knuckles the way it always does, and decides. "Then go away," Egg says. "I need 2 days to prepare the chamber." Aemon goes. The fire burns for 3 days. Dragonstone coal holds heat differently than wood, burns slower, burns deeper, fills the room with a warmth that accumulates rather than radiates, that saturates the stone and the air, and eventually the person sitting inside it until the distinction between inside and outside temperature becomes meaningless. By the 2nd day, Egg has stopped feeling the fire as external. He sits cross-legged on the chamber floor with the egg in his lap. He keeps his breathing even. This is the thing about patience that 18 years of failed attempts has finally taught him. Patience is not a feeling of calm. Patience is the decision to remain in the room when every other part of you is measuring the door. It is muscular. It tires and must be rested and picked back up again. On the morning of the 3rd day, he takes the knife, not deep, the inside of his forearm above the wrist. He has thought carefully about where, not because he is afraid of the pain, but because he is precise, and precision requires thinking carefully about where. The blood is dark against his skin. He presses his arm against the egg's surface and speaks the Valyrian words slowly, each one given its full weight, the way a man speaks in a room where he believes he is being listened to. "Axio," he says. "Recognize me." He says his name in High Valyrian the way it was spoken before it was Westerosi, the Dragon Road form, the syllables that carry the bloodline in their shape rather than just their meaning. He says it twice. He puts his arm down. He presses his palm flat against the shell. He closes his eyes. He waits. The shell moves, not a sound first, a shudder under his palm, a single contraction, like a heartbeat, like something testing the inside of its own world and finding it too small. Egg's eyes open. He does not move his hand. His own heartbeat has relocated to somewhere in the back of his throat. The sound comes second. Not a crack. The opposite of a crack. A long, fibrous tearing, like cloth, like old paper, like the world pulling apart at a seam it had been hiding for 80 years of silence. His palm feels the shell give, feels the give travel through the egg, the way tremors travel through ice. Then light, not much. A line of it, deep amber gold, hairline thin, running down the face of the gray-blue shell from the top third to the base. The egg is lit from inside. from something very small and very new that produces heat the way egg produces heat. From blood, from its own decision to be alive, the shell opens, not explosively, in pieces deliberate, each piece pushed aside by something that knows where to push. Wet, black, furious, the size of a very large cat, no smaller, the size of a cat that has not yet grown into its bones. Its wings are pressed against its body, and its neck is working hard at the job of supporting its head, and its eyes are open and they are the color of molten copper, and they find his face immediately. It makes a sound that is not in any text Egg has ever read, something between a scream and a question, the sound that something makes when it arrives into a place it has never been and needs to know if that place is safe. Egg presses his face against its neck. The scales are wet and hot and impossibly thin against his cheek. The creature makes the sound again, shorter this time, adjusting, learning that this specific pressure means the correct thing. It stops trying to lift its wings. It shakes once, full body, like a dog shedding water, and then it is still against him, and Egg's shoulders are shaking and he does not make a sound, and the tears are falling onto dark scales that catch the light from the fire and throw it back as copper and gold. He does not know how long he stays there. Aemon does not enter the chamber. He stands at the open door. He has been standing here, he realizes, without having made the decision to stop, and he watches his brother press his face against a creature that should not exist and cry without making a sound. 55 years old. Sand-haired, gone to white at the edges, shoulders that have carried 22 years of watching someone else do the thing he was built to do, shaped by that weight into something narrower and more durable than it started. He earned this. In the specific way things are earned by people who kept showing up after the point at which showing up stopped making sense. Aemon does not go in. He stands at the threshold a moment longer, then he steps back. He closes the door until it is almost shut. He stands in the passage outside with his back against the wall and the sound of the dragon finding its voice on the other side of the stone, and he breathes. He waits a long time. He does not need to count the minutes. He has more patience than the minutes require. Then he walks to the rookery. The ravens go to every castle in the realm. 712 ravens carrying the same message, terse and exact, no explanation and no ceremony. Something has changed. The king requests your presence. Lords who receive this message will spend 3 days arguing about what it means before they begin to travel. They will arrive at King's Landing suspicious and armed with political posture and prepared defenses for whatever threat they are about to be asked to absorb. They are not prepared for what is waiting in the sky above the harbor. Neither, for that matter, is the harbor. The wall is exactly as he remembers it. This is the wrong thought. He knows it is the wrong thought as it arrives. He has never stood here with these legs, these eyes, this spine that bends without the particular protest of a 100-year-old body arguing every motion. He has never stood here as a king. Every other version of this moment he carries in his memory is a different man in a different body. Older, blinder, colder, waiting for a mercy that came in the form of a fever on a ship far from everything he knew. But the wall is exactly as he remembers it. The scale of it refuses to resolve into ordinary experience. Aemon has spent 28 years looking at large things, the Red Keep's towers, the Dragon Pit's dome, the harbor at King's Landing when the fleet is in, and has developed the practical ability to look at large things without being unmade by them. The wall unmakes that ability. 700 feet of ice, blue-white and ancient, built by something that understood that some threats require a response at the scale of the threat itself. He stands at its base, and the top is not visible as an edge. It simply ends at a point where sky begins. He puts one hand against it, cold, immediate and absolute, seeping through his palm and into his wrist in the first second. He knows this cold. He grew old inside it. He grew very old and very blind and very small inside it. And it took everything from him over 6 decades until there was nothing left but a maester's chain and the memory of a family and a loyalty to a realm that had largely forgotten he existed. He presses his hand flat against the ice and stays there. Behind him, on the field below Castle Black, the dragon has settled into a crouch that manages to be simultaneously enormous and compact, the way cats are compact when they choose to be still. Green-gold scales muted in the northern light. Its breath rises in the cold. The horses that cannot be kept anywhere on the approach had to be stabled at the nearest holdfast, 2 days south, which means the wall's garrison has been on foot since the dragon appeared above the neck, and word went ahead like fire. The garrison came to the battlements when they arrived, stood there in complete silence. Aemon had watched their faces, men who signed up to freeze at the edge of the world, who came here as criminals or as men fleeing something or as the rare few who still believed the watch meant something worth serving, all of them standing on the ice with their mouths open, looking at a dragon. He had not smiled. He had felt something that was not triumph, something closer to the relief you feel when an argument you have been making for years is finally made unnecessary by the evidence arriving on its own. The investment takes 3 days to document. He meets with the Lord Commander, who is a former knight of reasonable competence, appointed 6 years ago by a watch that has been selecting for mediocrity so long the concept of better has become difficult to imagine. The man sits across from Aemon in the Lord Commander's solar, and speaks with the careful precision of someone who does not know whether they are being evaluated for promotion or execution. He is being evaluated for neither. He is being evaluated for what he knows. By the end of the first day, Aemon has assembled a working picture of the watch's actual state. Numbers, attrition, supply chains, the Ranger Corps, which has deteriorated from 300 active men to 64, of whom perhaps 40 are capable of sustained operation beyond the wall, the Steward Corps, managing Castle Black's food stores with the specific anxiety of men who have been watching the numbers shrink for 20 years and cannot identify the mechanism to reverse the direction. He writes 4 letters that night, to the Reach, to the Westerlands, to the Vale. Each contains the same request, not an order, though he has the authority for one, framed as an invitation to participate in something unprecedented. Food stores, equipment, recruiting incentives that are not currently legal, but will be by the time his ravens arrive, because he has spent 3 days drafting and approving the relevant ordinance on the flight north. The 4th letter goes to Winterfell. Willem Stark arrives on the 5th day. He does not come from the south. He was already riding north when the invitation found him, which means he was already coming before the invitation. Aemon notes this without showing that he has noted it. He is 36 years old, lean and dark-haired in the way Starks run when they do not get the gray. A winter's face, which means a face that has made peace with giving nothing away as a default position. He looks at the dragon for a long time when he arrives. He does not reach for his sword. He reaches for it and then makes a deliberate decision to stop reaching, which is not the same thing as not reaching, and requires a different kind of attention. He rides into Castle Black's yard and dismounts and looks at Aemon with eyes that are doing the calculation Aemon expected, insane or terrifying, measuring each option against the evidence of a 63-year-old man standing without armor at the base of the wall with a dragon 40 feet to his left. "Lord Stark," Aemon says, "my Lord King." He bows, brief and genuine. You ride a dragon to the wall and ask for a meeting. Most men would assume the issue was significant. Most men would be right. Aemon says, "Come inside." The cold earns its reputation. The fire in the Lord Commander's solar is the best fire in Castle Black, which means it is adequate. Willem Stark sits across the table from Aemon and wraps both hands around a cup and does not drink from it, a man keeping his hands occupied without needing what his hands are holding. Aemon recognizes this. He does it himself. "I'm going to tell you something true," Aemon says. "Not a version of something, not a version shaped for political use. The complete thing." Willem's eyes do not move. That's an unusual beginning. It requires one. Aemon sets down his own cup. He looks at the man across from him, a man whose son will inherit a watch on the ice, and whose grandson will die in King's Landing, and whose great-granddaughter will burn a city to ash in a future Aemon is spending his life preventing from arriving. He looks at all of that potential and says, something lives beyond the wall, not wildlings, not animals, something that was there before the first men came to Westeros, and that will be there after everything we have built has been forgotten. Willem Stark is very still. "The Long Night is not a story," Aemon continues. "It is a record, incomplete, damaged by 8,000 years of retelling, but a record. The wall was not built as a border. It was built as a last measure after a previous last measure failed." He pauses. "I have been preparing for what comes with it since the year I took the crown. The watch, the grain, the dragons. All of it is preparation. What I need from the north is not soldiers, Lord Stark. Not yet. What I need is a lord who knows what is real and can keep knowing it when the years make it seem unreal." The fire shifts. Light moves across Willem Stark's face. "You've seen them," he says, quietly. Not a question. "Not with these eyes," Aemon says. "With other ones." He does not elaborate. He watches Willem decide whether to pursue the answer, and watches him decide not to. the specific discipline of a man who has identified the more important thing and chosen to stay with it. How much time, Willem says. Enough, not generous amounts of it. Aemon looks at the table. The Night's Watch needs to be rebuilt into something capable. The North needs to know why, at the level of the Lord who makes the decisions. Not the realm, not yet, not all of it. The realm needs managing carefully. But you, he looks up. You needed the truth. Willem Stark turns his cup slowly in his hands. Once, twice, he is not deciding whether to believe it. Aemon can read this, can see the particular quality of a northern lord's face when he is deciding whether to act on something rather than whether to accept it. The acceptance is already done. It was done in the first 30 seconds. My rangers, Willem says, the best ones. They go to the watch for 2 years, on rotation, not criminals. My men, Aemon nods. And in return, Willem says, information, Aemon says. When I have it, all of it, directly, another rotation of the cup. Done, Willem Stark says. He rides south. 2 hours later. Aemon watches from the top of the wall. The stairs are 312 feet of ice and sweat, and the specific burning in his thighs that he has been managing all morning by refusing to acknowledge it. There are things you can outlast if you do not give them the attention they require. He reaches the top. He stands at the edge. Below, Willem Stark is a shape growing smaller on the south road, carrying something that did not exist when he arrived. Fear of the specific kind that does not diminish with distance, the kind that settles into the bones and stays there. The dragon lifts from the field. The wing beats are enormous and slow, lifting a body of that size requiring effort that has its own particular gravity. It circles east and then north, climbing, riding the cold air above the tree line. Green gold against gray sky. From this height, it is the size of Aemon's outstretched hand against the horizon. The world below the wall runs north, and further north into territory that has no name on any map the Citadel acknowledges. White. Still. Immense. Somewhere inside it, something very old has been watching since the dragon appeared above the neck 5 days ago. It has been patient for 8,000 years. It is patient now, but it is no longer entirely still. The letters fill 3 trunks, not scrolls. Letters, the folded, sealed, private kind that men write when they believe the paper will never outlast the writer. 32 years of correspondence between 11 archmaesters and 4 deceased conclave lords, and 1 warden of a discipline so obscure its practitioners are counted in single digits. The trunks arrived at King's Landing in 6 separate shipments across 11 months, carried by men who did not know what they were carrying, routed through intermediary cities so the trail folds back on itself before anyone can follow it. Bloodraven assembled it without leaving his chair. The chair sits in the small council chamber against the eastern wall, positioned precisely 3 feet from the weirwood sapling whose roots have begun finding their way into the old stonework below. This required relocating a tapestry and mortaring a new bracket into the wall to prevent the chair from settling as the roots move. Aemon approved the bracket without comment and told the steward it was for structural reasons. It is not for structural reasons. Bloodraven at 90 is a man who has resolved the conflict between his body and his purpose by abandoning the first entirely. His frame is still upright in the chair. He does not slump, has never slumped. The posture of 40 years of service survives everything else. But the flesh has retreated until the structure underneath shows plainly through. His one eye opens and closes with the irregularity of something operating on a different schedule than the room around it. His hands, folded in his lap, are the hands of very old men universally, thin-skinned, precise, mapped with the record of everything they have touched. His mind is larger than it has ever been. The first letter in the first trunk is dated 231 AC. It is addressed from Archmaester Theobald, dead now, 20 years dead, his chain distributed among successors in the usual ceremony, to a colleague in the Westerlands whose castle maester would have received it, read it, and burned it. Would have. Did not. The colleague was the kind of man who burned nothing. The colleague kept everything in a strong box under the reasoning that information kept is information owned, and information owned is leverage not yet spent. The colleague died without spending it. The letter describes a treatment prescribed to the last living dragon during Aegon III's reign. The treatment is framed with clinical precision as an intervention for a respiratory infection. Theobald writes of the dosage adjustments made over 14 months, the reasoning behind each adjustment, the monitoring of the patient's response. He writes with the careful, affectless language of a physician documenting a case study. The dragon died in the 14th month. The third letter, also Theobald, 3 weeks after the second, describes the conclave's private discussion of the outcome. Satisfaction is the word that appears 3 times in 4 paragraphs. Not relief at an end to suffering. Satisfaction. Aemon has read this letter 6 times. He reads it the way you press a bruise, not because you enjoy the pain, but because you need to know where the edges are. He does not go to the citadel. He does not summon the archmaesters to King's Landing. He does not convene a tribunal. He does not arrest anyone. He does not do any of the things that the men inside the citadel are now waiting for him to do, because they have been waiting since Egg's dragon appeared over Old Town 4 years ago, and the correspondence became suddenly, urgently secret in a way that confirmed everything. He calls for a maester, a senior maester, not an archmaester, not conclave, a working maester from a Reach castle, a man of middle age who entered the citadel because he genuinely loved medicine and left it because he loved people who were sick more than he loved arguing about theory. This maester sits at a long table with 4 copyists and reproduces the letters, 61 copies of each, not excerpts. Full-text Theobald's handwriting reproduced with note of the handwriting, dates preserved, signatures preserved, 1 copy for each of the great lords of Westeros, plus the copies sent to the 6 largest market cities for distribution through their respective reading rooms. They go out on a Tuesday morning, 712 ravens, which is by this point a familiar number. The letters travel with a single sheet of parchment, no argument, no accusation, no royal decree demanding anything. 1 question in Aemon's own hand. Did your maester know? The citadel fractures on a Thursday. Not the entire citadel. Institutions of that age and that depth do not fracture entirely, the way old walls do not fall entirely even when the mortar has given out in sections. But the sections where the mortar has given out become visible on a Thursday, which is when the first archmaester sends a letter to King's Landing not in defense of the conclave, but in documented separation from it. His name is Archmaester Willis. He is 71 and has spent 40 years in the Citadel's library and has no connection to dragons except as a subject of historical study. His letter is 3 pages of meticulous rage, the cold, architectural fury of a scholar who has spent a career defending the institution and has just discovered what was done inside it. He encloses records the conclave did not know he had, records of conclave votes taken in private session, on matters concerning Targaryen dragon-keeping texts, all voting in one direction, none of them appearing in the formal minutes. 2 days later, 4 more archmasters write. Not together, separately, each apparently believing they are the first. The correspondence that follows is not a fracture, it is a collapse. The Citadel's middle tier, the working scholars, the teachers, the men who spend their careers with their heads in texts rather than their heads in politics, turns on the conclave with the specific fury of people who have been used as cover for something they would never have authorized. They produce records because record-keeping is what they do. The records contain more than the letters. The records contain minutes of meetings, lists of texts withheld from distribution, a catalog of dragon-keeping manuscripts transferred to restricted access in 158 AC and never transferred back. 3 archmaesters face trial. Aemon conducts the trial without theater. No public proceedings. No performance of justice designed for an audience. A chamber. A panel. Documents. Each man given full opportunity to present their accounting of events, which they do with the creativity of men who have spent decades surviving the Citadel's internal politics and believe this is simply a larger version of the same game. It is not the same game. In this game, the documents are already published. Every great lord in Westeros has read the letters. There is no version of events that makes Theobald's satisfaction at a dragon's death look like anything other than what it is. 2 are exiled. Essos, specifically the far side of it, places where the Westerosi academic reputation carries little weight and the years they have left will be spent trying to rebuild from nothing. It is not merciful. It is not designed to be. The 3rd dies before the verdict. He is the oldest of them, and age had been arguing with him for 3 years before the trial. He dies in his room in the Citadel on a cold night in the 2nd week of proceedings, alone, with no one who will say clearly whether it was the age or the waiting. Aemon receives this news without expression. He notes it the way you note weather, as information about conditions, not as a thing requiring a particular emotional response. The conclave is reformed in the following year. Aemon does not dismantle it. He does not install loyalists, that particular trap, the one where you replace one set of men who believe they know better with a different set who believe the same thing about themselves, is visible at sufficient distance. He funds, he requests. He creates conditions that produce the behavior without mandating it. The translation project begins in 266 AC. Valyrian dragon-keeping texts that were warehoused for 108 years are opened, catalogued, assigned to translators. The first translation takes 9 months and produces a document that the new head of the relevant archmaestership describes as the most significant addition to living knowledge in 2 centuries, which is an assessment Aemon accepts without comment because he already knew the text's contents from the fragments Egg spent 22 years reassembling. The new archmaesters are not young men placed strategically. They are the working scholars who produced records during the conclave's collapse. Men who turned over documents when turning them over cost them something, which is the closest available test for whether a man's commitment to truth is institutional or actual. 3 of them had never expected to hold the rank. The surprise in their appointments is itself useful. Men who did not expect power tend to approach it differently than men who spent careers arranging to receive it. That night, Aemon sits with Bloodraven. The chamber is the small council room, but the council is gone and the candles are low and the weirwood sapling has grown another 6 inches since spring. Its face in the bark is clearer now, the features more defined, the expression more specific. Aemon has stopped trying to read the expression. Whatever it is not a human expression and does not benefit from being interpreted as one. Bloodraven's eye is open. This does not mean he is present. Aemon waits. They're louder now, Bloodraven says. The words arrive without preamble, not from sleep, not from waking, from the specific middle state that has become his permanent address. The trees. How much louder? Aemon asks. Silence. Not the silence of a man considering. The silence of a man who has been somewhere and is deciding how to describe what is not describable in the language available to him. Bloodraven opens his eye. Really opens it. The full presence arriving the way it rarely arrives now. Sudden, sharp, occupying the room completely in the specific way it did when he was 58 years old in a cell, and a young king said 3 words that should not exist. He looks at Aemon across the low candlelight, 1 word, delivered without inflection, without warning, without any of the calibration that Bloodraven applies to everything he says in rooms where the saying matters. Very. No rebellion. He begins here, the way he always begins when the accounting is due. No rebellion. No lords riding to war behind a young man's grief and a rumor twisted by 40 years, into the shape of an atrocity. No Stark bodies cooling in King's Landing. No murdered children in the Red Keep. No kingdom split along its oldest fault lines and bled until the fault lines were all that remained. No mad king. Aerys is 40 years old. He is the warden of the East and has held it for 16 years, with the particular competence of a man who was given a purpose before the absence of one could hollow him out. He is occasionally difficult. He is still, at certain angles, in certain lights, the boy who watched a dragon circle the dragon pit and said things without realizing he was saying them aloud. Aemon has not told him what he was supposed to become. He never will. No dragons born from grief in a foreign city. 3 of them circle the wall now instead. The sound of their wing beats reaches him before they resolve against the gray morning sky, a displacement of air, a pressure the body feels before the ears do, working up through the stone beneath his boots and into the bones of his feet. He knows this feeling. He has known it for 28 years, and it has not become ordinary. He suspects it is not supposed to become ordinary. Some things are designed to remain at the scale of what they actually are. He is 85 years old. His body has begun drafting its complaints in a language he cannot ignore, the way he ignored it at 60 and 70. The stiffness in the mornings is architectural now, deep in the joints requiring negotiation before the first hour of the day can be reached properly. The cold no longer leaves him after he warms, which is a new development, a development of the last 3 years, the cold finding ways to remain that it did not find before. His medicine has bought him decades that other men his age did not receive. His eyes are still clear. He considers this the one vanity he has permitted himself, the refusal to let his eyes go the way old men's eyes go, the fog and the softening, the world retreating behind glass. He needs his eyes today. Bloodraven went north 12 years ago. Aemon stood at the gate of Castle Black and watched him go. Not the wasted body going north. The body had stopped being the primary vehicle years before, but the raven, a single raven that flew north past the wall and kept going until it was a black point against white, and then nothing at all. They had agreed on this years earlier, in a conversation neither of them needed to complete because they had been completing each other's sentences since 233 AC. Bloodraven going north was not exile, not punishment, not the desperate end it had been in another telling of this story. It was the final posting. He is in his cave now. He is in his tree. He is in 10,000 ravens and a root system that runs beneath the permafrost in ways no living maester has language for. Occasionally, not often, not on schedule, a raven lands near Aemon's position and sits in the specific way that is not how ravens sit when they are only ravens. It carries no parchment. The message it carries has no medium. It arrives the way the cold arrives, into the body first, then understood. 3 days ago, one landed on his windowsill at Castle Black. 2 words. Not words, impressions with the shape of words. The closest approximation in any language Aemon commands. They move. He had been waiting for this since 233 AC. The waiting is over. The ranger arrives at the 3rd hour of the morning. He comes through the gate at a pace that is not a gallop, because the horse has been at a gallop for too long and has moved past it into something desperate and mechanical. The gait of an animal that has used everything and is running on the memory of running. The ranger's beard carries frost in the lower half where his breath has been freezing during the ride. His hands on the reins are not gripping. They are locked. The cold and the hours having removed the option of grip and left only position. 2 brothers catch the horse. The ranger does not dismount so much as stop being on the horse. He stands in the yard and looks at Aemon with the eyes of a man who has seen something. His mind is still arguing about whether to accept. Aemon walks to him. Not quickly. His body does not permit quickly in the 3rd hour of a winter morning, but directly, inside. Aemon says, "The fire in the solar is the best fire in Castle Black," which by this point in Aemon's tenure is a genuine fire rather than an apologetic one. He sits across from the ranger. The Lord Commander stands at the door, a man of 42, who came to the Watch from a minor lordship in the Vale and turned out to be the most capable commander the Watch has produced in a century. He came because Aemon made coming worthwhile. He stayed because he found the work was real. The ranger tries 3 times to describe what he saw. The first attempt gets as far as the word hard-home before the sentence loses its structure. Not from shock, not from cold, but from the specific failure that occurs when a man tries to force a human sentence around something that does not have a human shape. He stops. He starts again. The second attempt produces more. North of Hardhome, after the 3rd day, coming out of the dark in numbers that do not correspond to anything living that assembles in numbers. Moving, coming south. He stops again. He looks at Aemon with the eyes of a man checking whether he is being believed before he commits to the part that sounds like madness. "They were dead," the ranger says. "The ones I recognized 2 of them. Harker, who ranged with me 4 years ago, fell through ice on the Milkwater. And a wildling woman, big one, scar across the left eye. I watched her die of a wound that went bad. 2 winters passed. His hands around a cup. He is not drinking from it. They were walking. Aemon does not say anything. He listens to the silence that follows the way a man listens to weather, for what it tells him about what is coming, not for what it is in itself. He looks at the ranger's face, the face of a man who has ranged beyond the wall for 11 years, a man who has been cold and hungry and afraid in the precise way that teaches you the difference between things you should be afraid of and things you only thought were frightening. This man has found the first category. Aemon puts down his own cup. He looks at the Lord Commander. 4 words, send the ravens north. The Lord Commander moves. Outside the solar, boots cross stone in multiple directions at once, the garrison responding to a signal they have been trained for, without being told explicitly why they were being trained for it, the way soldiers absorb readiness without requiring full explanation. The ravens go out. Not to the south, north, to the ranging parties. To the wildling leaders who accepted Aemon's invitation to communicate 12 years ago and have been communicating since. To the 3 positions beyond the wall that Bloodraven's network established in the years before he went into the ground. The dragons feel it before the signal reaches them. Aemon does not know how. He has never fully understood the mechanism, whether it is the riders, or the wall itself, or something in the specific quality of the morning that communicates to creatures of that age and that nature that the thing they were born for has arrived. He only knows that by the time he reaches the top of the wall, all 3 are already moving. He watches them from the edge, the smallest one, green gold eggs, 28 years old now and enormous in the way that makes enormous seem inadequate, banks north above the wall's length and its wing beats drop ice crystals from the top of the ice in a long glittering fall. The second, darker, almost black in the flat light, follows. The third comes from the east, from wherever it spent the night, and rises to meet the other 2 in a convergence above the wall that is not coordinated the way trained animals coordinated. It is coordinated the way weather converges. 3 dragons, north of the wall, climbing. The riders are small against the scale of them, but they are there. He stands at the edge and looks north. He thinks about a ship, a fever, the specific darkness that comes when the body finally runs out of reasons to continue, the darkness arriving not with violence, but with a kind of tired relief, and then nothing. And then a chain against his chest, too light, and a great hall full of arguing lords, and his brother's face across 50 years of things that needed preventing. He is 35 years old, with 85 years of memory. Both things true simultaneously. The 35-year-old who stood up at Harrenhal and put his chain on a table and said 2 words into a silence. The 85-year-old standing on the wall in the 3rd hour of a winter morning, with cold in his joints, and clear eyes and 3 dragons in the sky that should not exist, that do exist, that exist because a man and his brother sat in a cold room on a rock in the sea and refused, for 17 years, to stop. All the dead who are not dead. All the wars that did not happen. 40,000 people who got sick and recovered. A girl in the Riverlands who has grandchildren now. A boy who was never handed a throne and never needed to burn the world to feel like he was holding it. He looks north. The dragons are smaller now, climbing, the distance taking them. Below the wall, far below, impossibly far. The army the ranger described is moving through the dark in ways that armies do not move, with the patience of something that does not need to eat or rest or maintain warmth against a cold it already is. It is here. It has always been here, waiting for the moment when the realm above it forgot, waiting for the walls to thin and the watch to hollow, and the dragons to be gone and the men who remembered the long night to be too dead to warn the men who needed warning. He did not let it wait long enough. He breathes. The air off the wall is cold the way it has always been cold. The way it was cold when he was 100 years old and blind and dying a long way from home, calling out for a brother who was already gone. He breathes it in. He lets the cold go where it goes. The largest dragon turns once above the northern tree line, a slow bank, a thing of that size moving with a grace that should not be available to it, and then straightens, and flies. He has never been more alive. Let them come. Let us know what you'd like to see next. The end.